Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. Okay, if you've been following along the last few episodes, we are trying to do a completely crazy thing. We are trying to talk about this idea of the three kayas, or the three bodies of a Buddha, or the three levels of enlightenment or aspects of enlightenment. It's this fundamental idea in the Buddhist world for sure. It's a fundamental spiritual idea, and it's crazy, and that it's like really ridiculously hard to talk about. And as we kind of mentioned before, this is one of our ideas in having on Bob Thurman, the great Bobby T, to talk about this. And it's such a complicated subject that you like ask the question, and then 45 minutes later, Thurman's still talking. Like, what is happening? Because it's so complicated, and he's trying his best. So, but anyways, we do not shy away from the deep end of the pool at GNT. We try to do our best with this, so we're going to try to do our best here too. We got here really by wanting to talk about what enlightenment means, acknowledging that this means different things to different people.
Yeah.
And but it can really mean this kind of like enlightenment state. So that's what we've been trying to talk about. And it occurred to me, Daniel, to point out that it's another way of looking at reality, or it's another way of how reality can be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have done episodes where we've talked about shunyata and the illusory nature of things. So we've done episodes on that subject matter, right? And how the world around it, and in some ways, is fundamentally illusory. And we can do that too, because that's not just like a Buddhist idea or an Eastern idea. I was thinking about like across the hall in the shower curtain of wisdom, in the bathroom across the hall, I have the shamanic quote about that. Ayahuasca goes through, and one of the main things you learn is that you learn the illusory nature of the world around you, what you seem to be real. And we've done episodes on the physics aspect of that too. Einstein and the optical delusion, right? That the world exists as we actually think we see it on a daily basis or something, which is not true. So we've done illusory stuff. So that one we did. And so in a way, it occurred to me like we're really in the midst of the other real major way of looking at things, home basing it out through a Buddhist point of view, but to be Buddhist, to think this way, obviously. And this goes back to India and Asia, all over the place, where you can look at like this idea that reality exists on these multiple levels of subtleness or something like that. That's kind of like the take-home idea, right? You can have like the more gross level physical things around you, right, that you can kind of perceive on the body level. And then you can get to sort of like an in-between subtle level where things are more energetic, right? And then you can see things from this very subtle point of view of like mind or spirit or consciousness or something like that, and it like exists on these three levels. And again, it's like just a primary idea. And I think to my mind, we've been trying to take our time to talk our way through this, because it's just like one of the other really big ideas, right? And we wanted to spend some time really kicking it around.
Right.
Yeah. And it applies to like an individual person. We have our physical body, we have the more subtle energetic aspects of us, and we have our mind and our spirit, our Shen, if you want to be Chinese medicine about this, our Buddha nature. And then we also have like that in the reality around us. Things exist kind of physically, but then things have these energetic levels, and maybe even they have this more subtle kind of spiritual level behind everything too. So anyways, we've been trying to do this. And we've been kind of like, okay, we're working on it. And I don't know, it felt to me at this point that we can at least say what we did a little bit. So we looked at this idea of the killing of the Buddha concept, right? We did a whole episode on that, which was the idea like, don't get fooled by the physical stuff around you. Make sure you go back to the deeper parts of things, the Buddha thing being symbolic of like the physical stuff around you that could like run away with your mind, right? Go to the deeper source. And that's the idea that's what Dharmakaya means, this idea of this reality body or truth body or something like that, right? Where you go to like the formless, pervasive, blissful level of reality all around you, right? And then, you recognize that. And then you can kind of see the other parts, the energetic manifestations and the more physical manifestations of things, but you also kind of know that there's this other part there. So we did that. And then we did the part where we were talking about the sixth great Zen master, Hui Neng, sometimes called the sixth patriarch. Patriarch may be a dated word, right? So maybe we'll start to think, well, go and calling him the great master of Zen, or the sixth great Zen master, the sixth person in line. And I thought that was a cool episode from my point of view, because I learned a lot thinking about it. Where he
Yeah.
kind of said this idea could be really abstract, but if you go back to the deeper source of who you are, you're tapping into your Dharmakaya person. When you look at the world around you and how you experience it, what's manifesting around you, then that's kind of your Nirmanakaya part of who you are. And then when you kind of try to generate internal thoughts that are positive, love, compassion for other people, these kind of like more positive states of mind, well, that's sort of your enjoyment body, your Sambhogakaya, right? And I thought, well, that we thought was really cool, because it kind of talks about this really abstract idea, but he tries to ground it in something that you can kind of do within yourself in a very immediate way. So I thought that was cool for me. I hadn't really thought, I had thought about it, but I hadn't, when you try to put something in words, you think about it deeper.
Right.
Yeah, which is like how this podcast helps us.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I don't know, anything else you want to say about any of those? You had reactions to doing those episodes. What'd you think of doing those?
Yeah. I mean, I think
kind of,
it's all great. And even if you're familiar with it, every time you hear it, something else comes out.
yeah.
Or you can re-grasp something that you might have forgot, or something that, it just sinks a little bit different every time you hear it again and again and again and again. And then time goes on. I mean, I think about this stuff on a regular basis, I'm sure, as do you, but I'm not like always like deeply contemplating, because we have regular lives and things like this. But like,
you can lose it in the reality of your everyday life. I mean, that's a known problem.
Yeah.
Right?
But
you have
then
your moments when you're practicing, and then in your everyday life, you kind of like lose the thread for those moments, right?
Yeah, but then when you make the effort, to prepare the stuff, to have the conversations, to and then it's live, right? Like, not only are we recording it live, but the conversations are live, picking and back and forth and whatnot, and then hearing from people, the questions, or the the things that they're wrestling with, or just the, hey, thank you for bringing this to my attention. It then has a different kind of meaning, because now you're not just thinking about it for yourself, you're then passing the torch forward to other people. We've definitely talked about this before, but doing and having these kinds of conversations further cement those things, even though they're already kind of like deep parts of who we are. It can never be deep enough. It can never really be to the point where like you set it and forget it. It's effort, it's work. It always can be this way, because I mean, we're both meditative kind of guys who live lives of our own choosing, fortunately, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I couldn't easily get caught up in my bill paying and working and making money and trying to survive.
Dramas of everyday life, right?
Yeah, and just put this stuff. I don't have time for that. I had a guy that I met with the other night. I was at an event, and he goes, I never forgot when you did this talk for my company that, you said start the day with some deep breathing and just relax and center yourself. He goes, and I do that every day. And I said, oh, so you're going to start meditating? He's like, when I retire, then I'll have time. In 5 years, I'm going to have time. I said, oh, that's a pretty big assumption. He goes, what, that I'm going to retire? I said, no, that you're going to be alive. He's like, oh, wow. And I was like, well, it is, isn't it? He goes, yeah. I said, okay, so you could die tomorrow. I'll start today.
Yeah. That's like first point. That's first point in the Lamrim, right? Stages of the path.
Right.
Like, ding, ding, ding.
Ding,
Make
ding,
your
ding.
everyday count, because
yeah.
you don't
So,
know.
and because of conversations like that, it reminds me of these kinds of things that we're doing as passing it forward. So whether this is your first time hearing this, or your 10th time listening to us, or you're listening to this for the third time, still trying to figure out what the fuck we're talking about, the struggle is for everybody, but you will get it. I promise you'll get it. Hopefully.
It's a funny thing, and we've referenced it in episodes here and there, but I can go back and look at like notebooks that I have from like Gallic Rinpoche and Ann Arbor. Thank you, Rinpoche. And you have those moments where you're like, I wrote that fucking sentence down 6 years ago. I obviously understood enough to write that sentence down in that notebook.
Yeah.
6 years ago. Why the fuck do I keep forgetting this thing?
Yeah.
So funny being a human being.
Yeah.
All right, whatever. We do our best, all of us.
We're trying. Okay.
We're trying our best.
A for effort.
Yeah. 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 We'll try to come up with what the thing would be for the D for the results, but okay. But we do our best. We do our best, that's for sure. All right, so in that we were really talking about like high and low versions of talking about this subject matter, because the sixth Zen master, Hui Nang, is trying to talk on a very practical level to people, you know?
Right.
He's kind of reading the room probably too, or the text is reading the room, whether this person existed or not, who knows?
Right. Right.
But, he's on his platform for the Platform Sutra. It's called the Platform Sutra. So he's reading the room from the platform, and he's saying, okay, let me give something practical to these folks. All right, here's a very concrete way you can kind of see and work on these different aspects of who you are, because these are aspects of who you are.
Right.
So if you kind of like keep your mind on the big formless part, you're going to be working on that aspect of who you are. If you keep aware of how the physical world is manifesting around you, you're involved in the creation of that. That's part of who you are. And then when you generate these positive aspects inside yourself, that's part of who you are too. And this will eventually lead to, the achieving of these enlightened qualities. All right, so he gets it real practical. And then you have versions that are really big. And I wanted to make sure that we did a really big one. So, before we went on, you and I agreed on this before we went on to talk about the Dalai Lama, which we wanted to do one more little thing with this, right? Which was to talk about this idea of real high enlightenment. And I'm interested in this episode, again, jotted down my notes from my side. You kind of like went what you wanted to talk about from your side. This is a hell of a subject matter.
Eric, if for just the several 100,000 listeners that we have.
Well, real quick, we're talking about this Kunjed Galpo, or the Supreme Source. That's what we're going to talk about.
Yes. Okay.
This guy right here.
That book, and one of the few books that both you and I have copies of.
Like a dual camera versions.
That's right. I find this to be interesting, right? If you're listening to this and you would care to share, I would absolutely, and I'm being very genuine right now, I would love to hear what your view on what you think enlightenment is. Right? Mm-hmm. So anybody who's listening to this, please email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com. It's probably the most easiest way to get a hold of us in the long form sense. You could certainly do a DM on Instagram at Gin and Tantra, but this is probably the best way. And it just out of just curiosity. Hey, the dog.
Dog. It happens.
Yeah. So anyways, that's
it's naturally part of enlightenment too.
Yeah, that's right.
The dog wants its Buddha nature explored. That's the koan. Does a dog have a Buddha nature? The dog just answered yes.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to explain what I think enlightenment is to me. The dog is trying to communicate it to us.
And
we just don't speak dog.
The answer is keep digging.
Yeah.
In the carpet.
It's down there somewhere. The supreme source.
That's right.
Very wise. Polishing a mirror, as we talked about last episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Digging in the carpet. All right. Yeah. So I want to hear that too. And again, with full acknowledgement, it means different things to different people.
Right.
It's natural that it would, right? People have different ways of seeing things.
Yeah.
So, okay. So for this real high idea of enlightenment, I got the order you were doing this. We were talking about this idea of the supreme source. And we haven't done too much on this kind of thing before. It's a little bit different for us. So this is the thing that goes back to this. We'll do a little context, right? Yeah. We always do a little context, and then we'll try to tell a tale.
Yeah.
So this goes back to this thing called the Dzogchen tradition. Dzogchen means something like great perfection.
Yeah.
And as we go through what this text is saying, what this tantra is saying, you'll have a kind of a sense of what they mean by great perfection. Okay. As far as like the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, there's four major ones. One is the Nyingma school, which is sometimes called like the old school. and for me, I had my first empowerment from a Nyingma teacher, very grateful for him. So there's some connection I have to this in some way or another, so I feel something about this. I had a really interesting conversation with Gelek Rinpoche about this. It's one of the ones, he's just such a kind person. And he would listen to you with such respect. So I was kind of asking him about this thing, something about how, the Dzogchen thing is, I think something like that too. I think I was asking something a little bit more technical, but it boiled down to like a Dzogchen point. So there's these four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and people are going to talk about things in slightly different ways. And Gelek Rinpoche said, "Oh, he had a thought for a moment, and then he said, yeah, for you, you have something going on like this." Like he kind of like did his like
Mm.
feeling of who I was, and he took a moment, and then he said, "Yeah, for you, have something like this." And he said, the Dalai Lama has that too. And I was like, "Yeah, I always have really admired that."
Mm.
And the Dalai Lama, that he has this incredible openness to different strains of thought, you
Right.
know, and sometimes even with, even though he's the head of like the whole thing, it's not like everybody's always going to like that,
Hmm.
just because the person is the head of the whole thing thinks some way doesn't mean everybody else agrees with him, in their hearts. So anyways, it's an interesting conversation. So I have something going on with this speaks to me personally. There's something about this.
Right.
I love these traditions we talk about. I mean, I really love them.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain how much I love them. Hopefully the love comes through because I really love this stuff. But yeah, this is something like I do feel something close. I want to do something that's kind of within this framework. And then, I also love the stuff from the school of the Dalai Lama too. So anyways, we'll kick this around, but that's kind of my part of my personal story around this. Yeah. And it was like probably one of my more meaningful conversations with Gelek Rinpoche. Like when you talk with a teacher about something like that and they kind of are like, okay, that's cool. You feel like, oh, great. You feel kind of a little bit vindicated
Right.
in how you feel about things. And it was probably like that with the Dalai Lama too. I mean, I never talked with the Dalai Lama in my life, obviously, but I've read his works and you're like, yeah, he's supportive of this kind of way of thinking. So,
Yeah.
all right. So we like to tell a story. So the story on this one, last episode, we told the story of the sixth Zen master, Hui Nang. Um, so this is the story of Padmasambhava. And we won't tell the long version, we'll tell the short version, but
Yeah.
he is a very famous
Yeah.
person within certainly the Himalayan Buddhist world, right? The Tantric Buddhist world. This is a famous cat. Um, so the name itself means lotus born. And again, there's this sort of like, is this a person or not? Who knows, right? We're back to that place again. But in terms of the stories of his birth, sometimes there are these kind of stories of like symbolic mystical births, and he would be born out of like a lotus, probably out of the lake of wisdom or something like that. Of course, the lotus is a really important thing in Buddhism because it symbolizes the idea you can have something that can grow in the mud but then flower out on the top, right? So enlightenment can come out of the world, and even though the world might be a muddy, messy place, enlightenment grows within that. That's the lotus. It also gets associated with like bliss, right? It can be associated with the combination of wisdom and bliss, and it's probably a feminine image. So
Mm.
it could be like thinking about things kind of like a womb or something like that, right? Uh, Also the symbol for like the fire phase. So anyways, it has a lot of different meanings to it. And so that's one kind of story of his birth. But other times he's considered to be born from a queen, from some royal lineage, and that happens a lot in old Buddhist stories. So in any case, he goes on to become this great tantric master. And I think if you just look like in a cursory way, which is what I did with this, you don't get a lot of tales about how he achieves this really, but he becomes this great master. But the real famous story about him is that he's the person who comes into Tibet. There's already the king of Tibet has invited Buddhist scholars and teachers to come up, and they're trying to propagate Buddhism in Tibet. And the idea is that there's all these negative forces and demons and devils that are up there in the Tibetan mountains that are stopping this from happening.
Mm.
So Padmasambhava comes in as sort of not like the great tantric master, but sort of like the shaman who comes in to like
Yeah.
purify the space to allow new ideas to grow or something like that. So this is like the real famous story. We had on the show Guy Newland, and he just talks about this a little bit. I don't think he talked about it in our podcast episodes with him. I want to have him back at some point too, because
Yeah.
I love him. He's really funny and really insightful and very articulate. A lot of great stuff to say. But anyways, he kind of has this whole thing like, what did that exactly look like? Was he just there with his staff, like walking through the mountains, smiting things, like, but anyways, that's the tale, right? That he goes and he does this, and he maybe even just by his presence being there, and maybe by doing rituals or whatever he's doing, he's like clearing a path. So that's like one of the real famous stories. I think the other really famous part about his life for sure is that he's supposed to have these 5 consorts. So that's kind of the tantric side of the tale, right? He has these consorts. One of them is really super famous, which is this Princess Yeshe Salgyal. Um, and so Knowledge Lake Empress. And so she's considered to be, one of these consorts. And and uh, it's very interesting for Yeshi Sogal because she has this kind of a female figure, a female enlightenment figure, which is a big deal, obviously. So that gets back to some of the kind of interesting parts in this culture. As I was putting this together, I would never want to say that like this isn't like that there isn't a sexist aspect to like Tibetan culture. That's obviously not true.
Right.
Right. But on the other hand, you do get these female enlightenment figures, which is kind of awesome. So, that kind of like fills in the different space. And she's very famous. And there's like biographies written of Yeshi Sogal and I actually have it on the shelf. I've never like read it cover to cover. But she's a very important figure, very important enlightenment figure, right? And then there's the whole idea that there's these 5 consorts. And that's kind of an interesting thing too, because it's obviously written in kind of a symbolic way. They're seen as being from different parts of, that part of the world. And when you put the parts that they're kind of on the map that they're supposed to be from, it looks like it creates a little mandala shape. It looks like it's a little suspicious that they would be coincidentally from those places. So in some level, this is read as being a little bit symbolic of the idea that they're all different aspects of the feminine divinity or of the goddess or of the tantric goddess, especially probably Vajrayogini. And so they represent like the 5 wisdom aspects of Vajrayogini or something like that. So there's a tantric symbolism in the story too, going back to these, female figures, which is kind of nice, right? And so there's not only just the fellas, but the ladies are involved and like perpetuating this tradition and creating this tradition, which is good, right? Certainly for us as like 21st century people are like, good. You get female figures who are there doing their thing too, and that's awesome. And then this is supposed to spread all throughout the Himalayas too. So there's references to Padmasambhava kind of like everywhere, right? As far as I understand it, Bhutan and Nepal. One of the concerts I think is supposed to come from Nepal. So he has this sort of influence over this whole region, and it's an important figure for everyone there, especially as it comes down to this idea of what they call the Terma tradition, which has come up a little bit in some of our podcasts. This is the idea that Padmasambhava secretly left all of these spiritual texts to be found by people later on, and whether they are considered to be magical emanations that appear in the right moment, or whether they're supposed to be like kind of physically there, hidden away for someone to stumble across, I don't know. But in any case, it's kind of an interesting idea, and the whole, it gets at something I think you like, Daniel, that the teaching will appear at the right time or something, it'll pop out.
Right.
Yeah. Now, whether or not you just write a book and say Padmasambhava wrote it, also possible as a historian, right? But anyways, it's an interesting part of tradition, and it's cool. It's very cool. So, all right, so that's a little bit on Padmasambhava. Anything else you want to say about him?
No.
What do you think of the shamanic aspect? It's interesting. I like that part of this too.
Yeah, a lot of the Tibetan stuff is shamanic. I mean, it's based on
sure.
shamanic practice. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all of this is really, to be honest. I mean, how else?
Well, the lines between these things really blur, and so
Correct.
that's the point of our show. You
Right.
drink some gin and tantra, you get drunk enough, you can't see the lines between things anymore.
Yeah, and I think that like the people who, or the beings who, passed forth different practices, like they came from somewhere. They were contacted by some being or some, in some deep visionary state, and were, learn how to do something, or were told how to do something. And that's like that's the whole like kind of like shamanic crux, is like divine interaction for the individual, right? And then to be able to take that and do something with it is the manifestation into reality, as opposed to just some kind of like vision that you have in a dream, or on your meditation cushion, or during a psychedelic trip or something like that. The kind of bringing forth from the pre-manifest into the shared reality. So all of these things have a very interesting and particular place in my heart and mind as this kind of practitioner, because it gives me, I don't know, I'd say like like a good kind of pat on the back kind of feeling that you can take something or absorb something or learn something, you know, and practice it yourself, but then totally be justified and encouraged to see how it works for you and how it is that you might have your own sort of like twist on it or your own experience with it, you know, to not just to make it your own and some kind of like American ideology, you're going to flip it into something else, repackage it and sell it, you know, no, not like that, you know, but to actually like make it work with your own mind, your own personality, your own genetics, your own teachings, your own ways of being, so that it can actually benefit you towards your own betterment in your own life. That's like the real practical application of it.
And like helping other people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny because when you really take a step back, there's like multiple levels that are potentially empowering in this. You can see things as like a manifestation of your own inner psycho-spiritual qualities, right? So you can own them as your own. So that's empowering, right? To say, yeah, you have the ability to do this, right? On the other hand, you can see that you can make connections with spiritual sources outside of yourself. So that's empowering, right? And you can do that. You don't have to have someone else do it. You can do it,
Right.
right? Like you don't just need like a priest to do it or something. You can do it. Yeah. And then the other part is you're also free to like interpret those things in the way that makes sense to you, right? This has been the subject matter over and over again in some of these recent episodes, right? Yeah. You get to interpret your vision for yourself.
Yeah.
And you can always learn more and like change your interpretation as you go and all that. It's all kind of empowering.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do, at least, you know, how we think about it. That's become clearer and clearer. We've done these episodes too, you know, over these few years. It's been like, yeah, this is very kind of an empowering thing. If you frame it in the right way, it's very empowering on a personal, individual level, right? Yeah. I guess, okay, I don't know where this exactly fits in these notes, but I wanted to say this too. And we can see what you think about this, Daniel.
Sure.
But it was occurring to me like pre-episode. This stuff also kind of depends on the idea that you see something beyond just your limited physical body. Just you have to see something that there's more to you than that. Right. Which is a hard sell in this culture. It's like American culture, and I don't know, other people maybe listening in other places can let us know from their own experience. But it's hard here, right? It's hard to get.
Well, it's not just American. It's not just American. It's
no, it's a whole way of looking at the world.
Is it like post enlightenment? You know?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of idea that the world, you know, post enlightenment, pre-Einsteinian, I guess, on a large scale, mathematic, philosophic type of viewpoint. Right.
Oh, I got a thing where I would say this is post-Darwinian.
Okay. I would go before. I would say before then, you know, but that's, you know, we can argue that that's a subtle point. Either way, that life is not just a bunch of like large scale objects banging into each other. And
well, I mean, Newton didn't think that way, and he's supposed to be the dude that started it.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. Right. But that was
he did not think that way.
The influence at the time made it such that that was the pervasive thought.
I think like most of those, okay, this is, we're not supposed to debate this now. I think most of these physicists probably didn't think of themselves as being like Darwinian. They didn't have a Darwinian sense of themselves.
Sure.
No one thought that way.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to just trash on Darwin or anything like that, though I like to do that. You know, we all have our things that we want to like, you know, shoot rocks at. But the reason why I want to shoot rocks at it is because of this thing, because of this idea that you're only your body or something. It's obvious when you get to this conversation about these different levels of who you are,
right?
These different levels of reality, that you have levels of yourself that are beyond your physical body.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, however, yeah, we could debate it wherever this got lost, you know, this idea. But in any case, you know, like I think that's a big point, you know. And I was thinking, yeah, go ahead.
I think part of it is that the Western, or maybe we could even, I don't even call it Western, maybe we can call it like Mediterranean.
It's a materialism.
Yeah, but like even pre that, the North African, Mediterranean, Indo-European,
like Greeks and Romans and stuff like that.
Yeah, like this comes from then. You know, it really starts to begin to be in this and that influence on the world, that colonization practice.
Colonization matters in this. That's
right.
For sure.
And so then like you have essentially philosophies that will spread much further than they would have normally because of
That's
the
right.
interlocking nature of the societies that were put together artificially, right? And so some ideas moved more quickly and have more staying power because of the way that the societies are woven together. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so the way that we're viewing things is from this, like new Roman Empire, right? The United States,
Yeah, yeah. We were having a
um,
couple episodes because you were in Italy, right? And it's
yeah,
like, yeah, the
exactly.
the empire
Um,
never ended. It just kept moving its like moving its home base around the world, right?
That's it. Sits juxtaposed to some of the Eastern philosophical ideas, which are really juxtaposed to it in that they're not exactly, they don't vibe totally. Or they don't vibe really at all. They're just kind of different. And we can kind of go, that's foreign. And what they do is weird and different. So we don't have to worry about anything they believe in because that doesn't follow what we believe, right? And this is how it kind of works. And so bringing it back to where we want to go so we can get back on track, that fits this Indo-European, Western, whatever you want to call it, idea fits very nicely with this idea of the Kunjit Gelpo, or the supreme source, because it is this almost like it almost has a monotheistic flavor to it in a sense,
Yeah,
so
when we talk about it, it's shockingly theistic.
yeah,
Like for a Buddhist work, you're like, oh, this is about as theistic as a Buddhist work could possibly sound. You couldn't get more theistic than this one. Yeah.
And it shows it shows the openness of the tradition. It shows the openness of the tradition, that like, it's like, okay, here's all these various things. When you think Tibetan, or you think Buddhist, we think probably monk person, maybe meditation, I don't know, bells, bowls, to, gongs, whatever. But you don't, but I mean, I'm going to guess that most people probably don't think of open-minded philosophical and religious belief.
Oh, I see where you're going with that.
Do you know what I'm saying? But
Bulls, bald heads, gongs, and
right.
open-minded philosophical belief.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet
Yeah.
that's exactly, I mean, look, take the words of the Dalai Lama. I don't want to make any more Buddhists. I don't want converts. Stay
Yeah.
whatever you are. Just be an open-minded, compassionate, open-hearted individual. Be a better Christian. Be a better Jew. Be a better Hindu. You're not looking. So like, to me, this is the crux of what it is that we're doing. It's a tradition in and of itself, but the tradition is not pigeonholed into one particular belief at the center. It's actually like a little mandala on the bottom, kind of manifesting in different ways for different people at the right place for the right individual.
Okay, I didn't want to kill your flow.
Yeah,
I got one thing I wanted to say about it, which is
sure,
just there's a weird thing. If you go, because I teach classes on this, even,
sure.
I do one at Pacific College, where I teach, where if you go back in the time machine and you look at a lot of these physics folks, they're not necessarily minded like materialists. They're
Right.
not. A lot of them are pretty mystical. You know,
Yeah,
Newton's a mystic, Kepler's a mystic, Einstein himself is mystical.
very much.
So it's hard to say exactly what changed in this, because I try to make this point to people, but it's not you don't get that way by looking at the fundamental nature of reality. Probably if you look at the fundamental nature of reality, like an Einstein, you probably get more mystical. You probably get mystical as fuck, because
Mm,
the universe is a mysterious place, and it probably brings out those qualities. But I really like, I hear what you're saying in the idea that like if you didn't have this element of like, let's push our culture everywhere for economic and political power reasons, this shit couldn't spread the way it
yeah,
does.
yeah.
So we live in like America, so we're living in this place that has this disproportionate influence. Its culture will spread out like wildfire through economic power,
Mm-hmm.
power within media, political power, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting kind of dumped out all over the place.
Yeah.
And you really could have like a really shallow, reductionistic version of reality, kind of from the dumbest parts of this culture. They kind of get like shunted off everywhere. We're in accord on that, I imagine, you and
Yeah.
I, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a problem, right? This is like a genuine problem. Because it's usually like, when you get to that thing, and you don't get the deepest parts of things that go out. You could get deep parts of American culture and beautiful parts of American culture, but it ends up being usually not that kind of finds its way out, into the marketplace of ideas.
Right. Yeah. There you go.
It's always like this stuff that like, well, this is kind of chinky, chintzy, and not so good, but like this will probably sell. So okay, let's put this one out there. All right. Anyway, so we agree. We both agree we don't want to blame this on the sciences.
No.
And I definitely don't want to blame it on like some physics or something like that. So, okay, we're in the same headspace. All right. So we'll start on this Kunjab Gelpo. We probably won't finish it, but at least we'll give it a start, right? Because you got cut off, yeah?
Yeah, I got like 40 minutes.
Oh, do you? Oh, okay, so
Oh
we're
yeah,
good. Oh, I thought you had like more of a
no,
3:30ish Chicago time cutoff. Okay, cool. Let's rock this out.
yeah.
Okay, so this is we're talking about this one. And this is a really fascinating Buddhist work and Tantra. And like what Daniel was saying, it's like about as close to anything theistic as you could possibly imagine, right? The title of this thing is relating back to this Kunjet Gyalpo, is the all-creating king. Though to get rid of the sort of masculine
Yeah.
gender bias within that, they've translated it as the supreme source. And this will make sense as we go through when we see what this thing says. So it's like personified in this really shocking way, right? It's a text that we'll talk about from a tantric Buddhist perspective, but like that there's this source and it's really personified. So if you were to ask, well, what is this all-creating king supreme source of which you speak? This book is going to tell you, because every chapter is this supreme source speaking out over and over again about itself. Every chapter is that, going, let me tell you about myself, and like a lot of times reiterating the same ideas, but it's like, let me remind you what I just said on the previous page.
That's right.
And if you forgot about that, it was on the page before that too.
Yeah.
So here's what it tries to say. It's presented as a dialogue, and a very intensely deep one, very deep and intense one. And from our conversations previously, it's also a very high version of what would constitute like the three aspects of the Buddha or something like that. Like it's a very high version. Like we were talking about low Christologies and high Christologies when we started this whole subject matter out. Some people see Jesus as a prophet. Some people see Jesus as a divine figure. Some people see him as like God. It's God in himself, So anyways, high and low. This is pretty high. So the Supreme Source says over and over and over again, really, every chapter on every page, he is pure and total consciousness. So sometimes you'll see this idea of like pure and total consciousness. This phrase shows up again and again and again and again. So there's a way in which this idea of pure and total consciousness is going to be the source of everything. We'll also use this phrase, self-arising wisdom. So in like just existing already on its own as this wisdom force and energy. So it's kind of like the ground of everything is this pure and total consciousness, this pure spirit and natural insight wisdom. Everything is this, if you can see things properly. So he's then therefore seen as the source of everything, but in a very funny way. I wanted to pull this kind of quote out specifically because it's very interesting. So he says, he himself is the womb from which all phenomena originate. So it says he is the womb. Okay. So right away, you can kind of get like the gender busting nature of this statement, right? And why they would say supreme source as opposed to something with maybe a more masculine pronoun. Because right away you can see that it's like the feminine masculine quality is being blurred in this, right? And I don't know, it occurred to me that like, there's a lot of questions around this in our time now, people asking all these questions about what gender really means, and this is gender, obviously, like, and the ultimate level of reality, this is like gender busting in a major serious way. So so the womb from which all phenomena originate, and yet at the same time the source and substance of everything, like right now. So part of the meditation of this one is, if you look around you, no matter what you're seeing, you're supposed to also, beyond the more gross level physical ways things appear, you're supposed to see them as secretly the supreme source, right? And it's really a question of optical illusion, that you don't see that on some level, which is exactly kind of like what the Behir was saying you know, when we were talking about that from the Kabbalah. It's the same kind of a teaching. So
Mhm.
there's a real universal quality to this, I think, right? So when they talk about things coming out, though, and I'll throw this out to you, Daniel. Again, I'm curious to see what you'll think about this, but from this source, everything comes out. So in some chapters, this supreme source will be kind of explaining, okay, this is how everything comes out of me, right? And so I'm all pervading like all space. I pervade everywhere at all times, like space, right? So there's definitely an analogy drawn at times between like space. Later on, there'll be like meditative things like thinking like the sky. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But then from that all pervading space, things start to manifest out within that space. And some of this will be undifferentiated unity, paraphrasing kind of what's in the book in the way that will, you know, speak
Mhm.
to like what we've talked about. And this will be like a mind of black appearance, you know, the unity before yin and yang differentiates itself. And then it'll be red, and then it'll be white, and that's the yang and the yin of the universe appearing, right? And then out of that eventually will come, from those three, the supreme source's body, speech, and mind. But that will manifest as like the three levels of reality that we all experience: very subtle, subtle, and then more gross level material reality, which also manifests in Buddhist thought. We've talked about in previous episodes as like sort of the three levels of reality of formlessness, form, and then the more desire realm stuff that we've talked about, right, in other episodes. The more physical world that we live within. All three of these levels of reality are coming out of the supreme source, and then into all of us as our bodies and our energies and our minds, right, on like a big picture level, but in each individual little uh, uh, aspect of reality, which is us. We're all a
Mhm.
little aspect of reality. We're all manifesting in this same way, right? Holographically. Um, and then the idea that there's his five elements, or the supreme source's five elements from the womb of creation, him, her, who knows, will manifest as the five elements will manifest as well, it'll really say like I have five aspects, and those appear as the five elements that make up nature, right? And that will become the aggregates that make up a person too: our form, our feelings, our concepts, our deeper drives, our consciousness, with their basic five emotions. So it's like this manifests out
Mhm.
from the supreme source. And as it differentiates itself kind of on different levels of reality, eventually you'll get human beings who have all these five things within us too, right? Tracing their way back to this source. So we have earth, fire, water, wind, or prana consciousness, right? We also have, related to that, earth and form, water and feelings, fire and our conceptual aspects of how we think inside, wind and our drives and goals, as we talked about in different episodes when we've talked
Mhm.
about these five aggregates, and then consciousness. We have those things in us because they're manifest of the template from the supreme source, right? We have that same stuff in us. And in a way that can also lead to like emotions that can go good and bad ways. But you know, this is where you get the problematic emotions too, like ignorance with form, and then sometimes they'll say pride, you know, with feeling, and then attachment that can go wrong with fire and the concepts, and then um, uh, jealousy, envy, and then anger, right? But you know, it's like a kind of like anyone who has heard anything about Asian culture will immediately recognize this as some big chart of like correspondences that are happening. But the point in this like idea of this text is that this is all coming out of the supreme source, and then it's just manifesting in each of us. Isn't that a trip?
It is a trip.
And eventually in the end what'll happen is it eventually says like no matter what you are, when you're a teacher or you're presenting a teaching, or if you're a student, you're all me too. No matter what it is, secretly it's me, you know. So anyways, that's kind of like the way to kind of talk about what this text is trying to say. Right.
Mhm.
So for me, interesting in your reaction obviously too, but for me, you can't help but notice on the one hand how Taoist this is, if you like Taoism, because in Taoism you'll say there's a Tao and all these different things manifest out of this Tao, and that's how you get all the elements of reality. I mean, obviously the Taoist tradition will say from the Tao comes a unity. This will become yin and yang. This will become the 5 elements or phases, and reality will keep flowing along this way, right? Till eventually it like differentiates itself, and then you and I are sitting here talking about this stuff. But it's supposed to be like really because we're manifested out of this source. And then also like how theistic it is.
Yeah.
But in this really interesting way, because it's like it's goddess, it's God, it's mind, it's spirit. It's like not one thing. It's like, it's not just saying I'm this particular, I am Zeus, hear me roar. It's not exactly saying that. It's doing something else. Sometimes it uses it'll talk about my nature is like this, and it does this and this and this and this. So sometimes you'll see the pronoun it there, so it's really like flexible on this point, right? It's really not trying to say I'm a goddess or a god or even the pronoun it. It's like all over the place with this stuff, actually. And it keeps saying consciousness.
Right.
Keeps saying consciousness, mind, spirit. It keeps saying that. Wisdom. It uses that phrase a lot. It's interesting. So it's theistic, and yet it's kind of not. All right, because I was talking for a little bit. Let me throw the mic back. Which parts jump out at you that you want to like run with?
I, without prepping at all, I had a page bookmarked.
Oh, in this thing? Okay, you're ready to roll.
I will read, but I haven't read it yet.
Okay, shoot. I got a couple too. So
I trust in that what's going to happen is going to fit just perfectly.
The trippy thing is if we have the same things bookmarked, but let's see.
Well, we'll see. That there's about 300 pages in here, so that's 1 out of 250.
Odds are against us, but go
odds
ahead.
Are against us. But anyways, here
I'm still interested. Go ahead, shoot.
Okay. I am the core of all that exists. I am the seed of all that exists. I am the cause of all that exists. I am the trunk of all that exists. I am the foundation of all that exists. I am the root of existence. I am the core because I contain all phenomenon. I am the seed because I give birth to everything. I am the cause because all comes forth from me. I am the trunk because the ramifications of every sprout come from me. I am the foundation because all abides in me. I am called the root because I am everything.
Yeah. So, when you're reading that, so we had a great Sufi episode on, and the guest was not so secretly Daniel's mother.
No, not secret at all.
So what's funny about that is like, couldn't that be something Sufi? For sure.
100%.
For sure. Right? Yeah.
100%. I would, as you're talking, I'm thinking like, what would you call a religion that's Christian without Jesus being Jesus? Just, like another prophet.
Well, that's called Islam.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like essentially removing one particular, deified prophet, right? Having prophets, having saints, having great masters and beings of great enlightenment and great influence, but not raising one up, which to me always seemed counterintuitive, because if there's supposed to be one, according to the teachings, these teachings in particular, and those teachings in those traditions, there's only one source, right? Or there's only one, Allahu Akbar, meaning God is great. There's only one, but there's only one God, but God. And same thing in Christianity. It's not monotheistic. It's not polytheistic. It's monotheistic. So if there's only one God, why is it that we would place something closer to it than we would be? It never jived. It never jived right. So when I read this, and as we're going through this again, it's yet another reminder that it's like, oh yeah, the seed of everything is the same, right? The manifestation of everything is this thing, is the trunk, is the seed, is the branch, is the leaf, is the air around it, is the soil that it grows within. It comes from the same. It's like, if we're all carbon-based life forms, then we're all carbon. But if everything isn't carbon-based, is there something that makes matter what it is, or makes energy what it is, or makes mind what it is? And the answer is, yeah, probably. And it's this, whatever this is,
Well, Well, I think that whole story of, I mean, it's attributed to different people, but I think it's supposed to also go back to Rumi, this idea that you have an elephant and everybody feels a different part of the elephant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's hugging the trunk, another one's like feeling the tusks, another one can feel the, you know, the nose or whatever they call it. What's
Right.
that called? Yeah.
Trunk.
Trunk. Thanks. You can feel the tail, or whatever, depending on like how fortuitously placed you are relative to the elephant, I suppose. We
Right.
get a different grip on something. But you all feel different things. But I don't know. I mean, I think if you said like there's a system of thought that says that like everything is coming out of some one source, you could say that that's Islam or
Mm-hmm.
Sufism, but you could just as easily say that's Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or different versions of Indian takes on things,
Yeah.
or different versions of like Tantra. Right? Why not? Isn't that the point? Right? Yeah. So the only other thing about this, which is kind of, and I don't know, and then I don't want to like say something that's like, like, well, like maybe we do want to say things that are controversial. But the other thing about this is just the idea, like you can get this vibe, like in Islam, at least as an outsider to it on some level. Although I love Sufi things, right? I love Sufi poetry and Sufi poets and stuff. But you can sometimes get within that cultural setting that there's like the divine source and everything else is just sort of like underneath. You sometimes you can get that strong division.
Mm.
And the thing in the text, like, and I'm not saying that's representative of how Islam is supposed to be or something, but that's the vibe that you could get. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And at least within something like this, boop, the idea is that everything around you, including you, is also the same thing. So it's not like there's this big divide between this awesomeness thing and then a bunch of things that are relatively speaking lowly. Again, I'm not trying to say that that's what it's supposed to be in any of these like traditions, but that's a lot of times what people walk away with. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
I know. What do you
Yeah.
think about that? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say probably that it's not, I don't think it's just Islam though. I think
No, I'm not. I'm not trying to. I'm not in any way
no,
trying to like specifically put the target on any
right.
particular belief system in this.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I think it's all of them actually. And
Yeah,
not only is there division between uh unmanifest God, divinity, however you want to call it, supreme source, Kunjit Gyalpo, and then
yeah,
everything below, but also so that's within your own box. But
yeah,
then your box is inherently better than that other box over there. That box over
yeah.
there is even below your worst of the worst, because that box believes in another thing that is not this good thing, but we're not as good as this top thing. And then it just keeps dividing all the way around. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It
there's
ends
an
up,
absolute like hierarchical aspect to it.
yes.
It's like infinitely hierarchical. Yeah,
And that's the whole, but like this work in particular pokes a pin right through that balloon and says, why? I am
yeah,
all the same. I am all of it. So thereby, how
yeah.
can that be different than this, at its truest source,
From
right?
the eraser on the tippy tip of this pencil to the
Yeah,
greatest archangel.
right. And I
Yeah.
think, to the point about Rumi's thing, I think, I don't know that's that story, but is he talking about blind people touching an elephant?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, okay,
Yeah. I didn't clarify the blind thing. I
yeah,
thought
so
like,
that you have a bunch of
if you
blind
don't know the tale,
right.
if you
So if
don't know
you
the story, yeah, part of the story is they're blind.
Yeah, so a bunch of blind
Yeah.
people touching an elephant, all are describing a different thing, and yet it's still the same elephant. And the extrapolation to that is that all of us experiencing divinity as something different, still experiencing divineness as beings with perception.
Yeah, because like part of the text, this Kunja Gyalpo is trying to like say, no, you have to recognize this. This is the secret thing that's you're supposed to get, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
And it's not like outside of you or outside of anything. It's everything, like all the time. It's everything everywhere all at once. Daniel's favorite movie, you
boom.
know? Yeah. So I don't know, like in terms of my own different personal experiences with this, there was a certain moment. I think we were already doing the excuse me. I think we were already doing the podcast, and I got like, boy, this hierarchy thing really bothers me,
Sure.
and I had never like hung a word like that on it, you know. But it's like one of those things. Once you hang the word, once you see it, well, you can't unsee it,
Right.
you know. And I mentioned it here and there in different episodes, but I was like, oh yeah, this really bothers me. And these things that start doing these massive hierarchies, because you do start to see it's like really hierarchical. It goes from the divinity to the priest to the king to the this one to the that one, and then down somewhere at the bottom is the rest of us schleps,
The
under
serfs.
this massive hierarchy. And you're like, well, that's something to be fucking suspicious of. The
Sure.
minute you got a worldview like that, then like some alarm should be going off in your head, going, I think someone's getting shafted.
Yeah.
And wait a minute, I'm looking in the mirror
Oh,
and I'm seeing a big shaft sticking out my
hello.
backside.
Who
Might be
put
me.
this, who put this
Yeah.
collar on me? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that. There's something wrong with that, obviously. But you're right, like the ubiquitousness of that idea, right? Then coupled with the ones like, okay, they got their own hierarchy over there. That one's completely diluted. So we got to
Right.
trash that one. That
Right.
one has to get destroyed because that's messing with our hierarchy.
Right. Right.
What's
Right.
wrong with
That's
those
it.
people?
Has to be
Yeah,
destroyed.
it has to be destroyed.
Has to be
And don't
destroyed.
they understand that all their hierarchy shit is way below ours?
Yeah, they should know better.
And the hierarchy of hierarchies, their hierarchy is like way down at the bottom of the hierarchies. Ours is up over here. That's really fucked up. So fucked up, dude. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to unsee. You know what I mean? It's a really hard thing to unsee. And it did affect me a little bit. The extent that you could have aspects of spiritual traditions that are like that. I just was like, I can't stomach that. I cannot abide that. Because I think that's this like a source of like, we don't throw the word evil around, but it's a source of evil, not in the devil Halloween sense. We're heading into Halloween. But maybe like a moose.
There you go. Yeah.
Horns.
Bullwinkle. Rocky?
Bullwinkle.
Yeah.
Mirror, mirror on the wall. Old Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. So, but the idea like, that's a source of like something really, really toxic. That's about as toxic as you can get. The minute you start doing that, you're on the road to toxic town. Yeah. Okay, so we bitched about the few things that we really don't like. Daniel, I didn't finish it. Let me say it real quick. The thing about the body and seeing that there's things beyond the body, I wanted to talk about it. This is a definite tangent, but I wanted to do it real quick, and then we'll get back on target. But let me see what you think about this.
Sure.
So what sometimes has bothered me, even with our own little field of like traditional Chinese medicine.
Sure.
I've had conversations with students where they're like, I want to put people back in their bodies. I want people to be back in their bodies. And they know what they mean when they say that. I'm not unempathetic to what they're saying. They're saying, I want people have their minds are running all over the place. And what I want to do is I want them to get rooted more somehow. So it stops the running around of all their minds.
Sure. Yeah. The grounding, the grounding of the
grounding.
Mind. Yeah.
But I can remember I was like, it's so ubiquitous. And at a certain point, I could remember talking to a student and she would say this over and over again. I want to ground people in their bodies and ground people in your bodies. And at one point I said to her, well, why do you want to do that? Like, why do you think that's such a great idea? In the sense that like, yeah, I get what you mean. I'm being empathetic to what you're saying. You want to stop people from like running around with all their crazy thoughts.
Sure.
Okay, I got it. But there's more to people than their bodies. So you don't get people saying, I want to ground people in their shens, in their highest spirits. Nobody fucking says that ever. Correct. They all say they want to ground people in their bodies. And like the point I was trying to make was something like, that's part of the limiting views that are causing people so many problems. Because on the one hand, of course, their minds are running around like crazy. I get that. But on the other hand, beyond that, all they think they are is their body. And so your whole idea, even when you say that to them, I want to ground you in your body, you're kind of reinforcing this idea that all you are is a body. And if all you're thinking of yourself as a body, you can't see the supreme source. Because there's more to you than that. You get what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah. No, I mean,
and it's like such ubiquitous language. And I remember telling her this, I'm sorry, I'm talking over you a little bit, I apologize, but I remember, and she looked at me with this shocked expression. And then she said, well, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Like grounding people in their bodies? And I was like, no, no. From a certain point of view. Though again, empathetic to what they're trying to do. Okay, let me hand the mic off. Sorry, I just wanted to like.
Yeah, I think that like with it all, the right medicine at the right time for the right person.
Yeah.
So for some people, because I'm going through this program now where it is body focus, it's body focus. And one of the lines I took away from this program for sure is we're in these bodies not for nothing, you know,
Okay.
which is a way of looking at it. And I think that the dissociation from our bodies, whether it be from, and I have two kind of thoughts on this. One, as a defensive mechanism, right? So fight, flight,
I'm
or
not saying
freeze.
that's not true. That's true.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's one part. But then the other part is that like we use our eyes and minds more than we ever have in the past. And yes, people could say, oh, we always work with our hands and our eyes, but not to the level of screens and outward motion that we do on a regular basis as we do today. There's just no comparison in history. I don't care if if your great granddaddy was a blacksmith and you still run the shop as a 4-year-old. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
when the sun went down, the only light you had was fire, you know?
Mhm.
And now TV never stops. TV used to go off. Now TV never stops, right? Your phone, all this. So I think this is the other part. So there's kind of like trauma aspect of it, and then this sort of like the Chinese medical, the Hun, the liver component, the eyes leaving the body kind of part. And I agree with, and I like the idea, because I think people are generally dissociated from themselves, like for a lot of folks, you know, and the body is a source. And I talk about this with a lot of my patients, and you probably do as well. But the body is a source of like shouting. I'm hungry, so you feel hunger pain. I gotta poop, so you feel the rush to move somewhere. I'm horny, you know. I'm thirsty. I'm in pain. You know what I'm saying? But there is not this more subtle dialogue that occurs between what we're thinking about and what we're experiencing as a being. And so that there is lessons to be taken from the hardware, because the hardware is storing our experience that we have in this life. And if we're using this life as fuel for fire for our not, I don't like to call it this oversoul, but if this life is an experience for us to grow from, and I can't remember everything, the body, like the book that we've talked about before, the body keeps score. The body then is imprinting all the things that we have, right, that we've experienced, and some of it sometimes it gets locked in, and thereby we recreate the dialogue between the mind and the body. But to your point, this is a conscious approach, right? This is me using the Hun, me using the wood part of my Shen, my soul, the one that goes out and sees and dreams, and turning that back in and finding that the parts in my body that are speaking to myself, not just quote unquote grounding. But then also on the other hand, and related to your point, if that's where you stop, then you're missing the whole thing. Then you are grasping onto a finite piece of machinery that is, albeit perfectly built, still is finite. And to your point, the aspects of ourselves that are infinite are being missed out on.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can be empathetic to the idea that someone undergoes a physical trauma, sexual trauma, and whatever, and they have these dissociated aspects of what happens. So definitely, we all see patients like that, right? And part of it is sort of, you might say, healing some connection of the mind to the body or something like that, right?
Then we can't forget about the inherited stuff along, right? Because if you can pass trauma in
Yeah.
your lineage.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sometimes it is an acute thing that happens in someone's life. Sometimes it's accumulation. There's a book now that I'm reading. I think the Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, which is a really great thing, and he talks about a lot of the traumas that we just have in modern society with working parents, and the negative influence of Dr. Spock's books in like the 50s and 60s about letting the kids cry and not giving them the opportunity to just be held and cared for. He talks about, there's some cultures who he's been influenced by in Canada, native cultures. They said that their goal is to never let the infant or the baby touch the ground until they're 3, always being carried by somebody, because you don't have a fully developed nervous system. So you rely on the adults to kind of tell you what's safe and what's not safe, because you don't know. You're just this weird little, fish with legs, right?
Yeah.
And so there's these other kind of things that are maybe like subacute traumas that we might, maybe that's not even the right word for them, that are kind of laid inside of our physicality. And I think from the defense of the other side is that they would want to unlock those. Now, whether or not someone would come to you and say, I want to put people in their bodies, I think they're just referencing the grounding in their mind. But there is also here something for us to unlock. Without the hardware, the software is somewhere.
No, that's all wrong. I'm just giving shit. in a way that I shouldn't really give shit to you. It's not. I just an explosion of emotion. My
So no, right.
apologies.
No,
Because
no,
I'm
no.
willing to die on this fucking hill.
Right. Well,
I'm
right.
going to charge up this fucking hill and die on this hill.
Sure.
Okay. The thing is, and yeah, sorry, this is like, we very rarely have moments of emotion.
Emotions are good.
When you say something like the hardware and the software, the image itself has, this is the reason I reacted the way I did.
Yeah, I'm not offended.
Yeah. So the image, that image itself is a 21st century image
Sure.
of the idea that the buzzing of the computer produces the epiphenomenon of the mind. And if I take away the hardware, there's nothing left.
Sure.
Once the hardware's gone. And I guess the thing that bugs me, Daniel, is like, we're living within this cultural setting. This is the thing we were talking about earlier. This is the view of the world.
Yeah.
Hardware, software, you know, and it's the hardware that buzzes and whirs and it produces this thing, you know, but the software doesn't exist outside of that. It's just like something that comes out of the hardware. You know, that's the reason I'm so emotional on this point, because it's like, no, because you can't see this from that point of view. It's very hard because you think I'm just some whirling, buzzing apparatus, you know? And I guess from my point of view, it would be something like, everyone is living probably, and Bobby T makes this point too, and we both know it. Yeah. Everyone's living within this paradigm, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is the paradigm. And when you start saying, I want to put people in their body, or we're going to go back to the body, you're already kind of in a certain sense reinforcing this paradigm that everyone thinks potentially, right?
Sure.
Of course, there could be positive, virtuous aspects like what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
Not belittling those at all. And then the thing is, it makes you wonder whether or not, like, even all clinical fields are so enmeshed in this paradigmic way of looking at the world that like the people practicing don't even see that. You know what I'm trying to say?
Sure.
Because I could very easily say, you know, my goal is to like really like root you in your Buddha nature. No one ever says it, ever.
Yeah.
And why? Because they don't believe it.
Right.
They don't believe it exists, because they think they're hardware producing software, and they think their patients are too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, I know it's such an emotional thing for me.
Yeah, no, I could see.
I very rarely just like blurt out.
Well, yeah. And I
know,
think,
but that's the part that bugs me. That one part about like even the hardware software, that's such a 21st century analogy, right?
For sure. But
yeah,
you know, we have to be what is that book that says the book is called Meditation as Medicine. And we've talked about it. It's been a long time though, but you know, the guy opens up, he's a neurologist, and he opens up the book with, you know, a little prayer he says before he meets with his patients. Lord, let me speak to them in a language they'll understand. And so even though it's dualistic in nature, right? Hardware, software. We're already outside of the supreme source, right? We've already split at least one time, right?
Well, it's even different than that. It's because you're denying that there's another aspect of reality. You could say, oh yeah, there's a body going on.
Yeah.
But the minute you say hardware, software, everyone knows that without the hardware of this phone, shit ain't happening, right? It's just hardware. And, you know, so that already eliminates a whole aspect of reality. You know, it eliminates the other two bodies. They're gone.
Sure.
Disappeared. I'm willing to die on this hill.
Right. Well, but I'm just saying is that, like, but at the same time, in order to be able to walk people through to that, there has to be a shared language, you know? And so this is that shared language. And yes, they talk about hardware and software, but at least the software is acknowledged. And I think for a long time, the software was not acknowledged. Actually, it was only hardware. Yes, we're hardware dominant. But there are far more people who you see and who I see now who are willing to acknowledge that work has to be done on the software in order to have a change in their physical experience, in order to have a change in their life. Whereas before, and I'm talking not even that long ago, you know, maybe 20 years ago, that like it would only be take a pill, do this thing. And now the ideas of like mindfulness, meditation, breathing, the spiritual side, mental health, breaks for yourself, whatever, retreats, to work on this, you know, quote unquote software are far more accepted, right? FMLA is, you know, is far more accepted now than it was before, unless you literally had like your wife died and who was going to raise your kids? Because do you know what I'm saying? Like, these things are far more prevalent than before. So to your point, yes, I agree. Without the hardware, what is software? I don't know. What's the cloud? There is no cloud. It's a bunch of wires and servers hooked up to some wall somewhere plugged in, you know. But at least people have this idea that we can take apart, but it is in existence. Do you know? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of these things where I'm not sure. It would question. The question would be like when someone uses this analogy of hardware and software. How does that sound to that person? Do they actually think, oh, I have a Shen that transcends this body? Or do they think, oh, yeah, I'm like a computer, you know?
Mm,
Because the dominant image is like the computer, right?
mm,
And the computer is like, I mean, this depends on how this image hits people. So
right,
I don't know the answer part.
right.
It's whether or not you go, when you hear the word software, you go, oh, there's something beyond just the hardware that then can change the hardware, you know? Okay, then
Well,
that analogy doesn't even make any sense anymore.
but this is the question that I asked earlier, right?
Mhm.
What do people think enlightenment is? The answer to that question is inherently built into this idea right here, is inherently built into this argument. Depending on how some people believe, they will answer that question different. So again, I'll ask the audience again, what do you believe enlightenment is? And based on and the answering that question, you can think for yourself, do you have this view, what do you think of the hardware versus, or not versus, but hardware and software, merging? Is there software without the hardware? Because essentially, if you could, to me, by asking somebody or
Well, no, but
talking
like
about,
in the computer, there is no software without the hardware. There is no software without the hardware.
but I
The
will say,
software is an epiphenomenon of the hardware. I mean, that's what the analogy would actually mean. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, for me, I look,
But you're
but that's
saying it
not,
differently. You're saying it
yeah,
differently. Yeah, you're
yeah,
saying it
I'm saying
differently. I
that
get
this,
that. I'm just saying,
yeah.
like, what do people think when they hear that analogy?
Sure. Oh yeah,
You
I'd
know what
love
I
to know.
mean?
People, yeah, people.
Yeah.
If you hear that, when people hear this analogy, please, and I will do, and I will myself take this upon myself as a clinician to when I will intentionally bring this up because this comes up every time. And we talk about this in Chinese medicine, the psycho-spiritual aspect of a being that has physical manifestations, somatization, right? But
Yeah.
there's this crossing point between the two that occurs where someone's brooding over X, Y, or Z will have an effect on their digestion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Yeah. That's very, very true. Very
yeah,
true.
so
Mhm.
so we're looking at this but that means then, like I said, you have a psycho-spiritual aspect, and if I can get to someone to admit that, well, then that means that there might be more there for them, right?
And what
And
you're
now we
basically
can start
saying
to,
in the end is that this tool of saying software and hardware is a way of tapping into how this person is maybe thinking about the world a little bit already, and you
yeah,
tweak the image for them.
yes,
That's what you're saying, and I get it. You know
yes,
what I mean?
yeah,
But I also kind of like it's this point of like it's been a point of concern for a long time because I could see this thing in people that
sure,
there's in the culture, and again, Robert Thurm talks about this when he
yeah,
first went to India. They're like, you're not going to get enlightened, his teacher tells him.
right,
And
because
he's like, why? Why are you saying it to me? Because you don't believe there's anything in yourself beyond just this physical body. You think you're just that, you know? And then so anyways, that's my point of concern. It's a funny thing to bring up in the middle of an episode on this, but it's part of the conversation.
but I mean,
Because if you
I
can't,
mean,
if you can't see there's more to yourself beyond this, then you can't enter into this world of these other aspects of reality and these other aspects of who you are. You can't get into that space. You're just
yeah,
locked in this little box
yeah,
of your physicality. Yeah.
and that's the point. But that, I mean, that's the much of the point of this book, right? Is
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the source of it all is the same source, the source of the hardware, the source of the software, like that, the same source of all of it is there. And so to be able to see that, experience that, understand that, whatever.
It's a weird way an episode like this would come together because we were talking earlier about like you have this view of the way of looking at the world that's like been spread out,
Yeah, yeah,
because there's this sort of political economic colonization
yes,
happening. And so this view becomes more and more pervasive. And it is jutting up and like hitting against other views that would potentially be different, right?
hmm,
But it's there, and it's like in a certain sense so pervasive that it's like the fish in the water. It's hard to see the water anymore.
yes,
It's so pervasive, you know. And I think a lot of times in people's own minds, they don't, you'd have to really look like what Bob Thurman is talking about
hmm,
from his experience. Again, we told the story in different episodes, but from this moment of going, why is this Tibetan man telling me I can't get enlightened?
Yeah.
And he's saying it's because of the paradigm you come from and the way you look at the world. You think you're only your body. And and again, I would look at people within our little field and go, how many of them actually honestly believe there's more to them than just their body? That becomes the question, because we've all been raised to think this. You know what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, that's part of the conversation for sure. It's kind of funny. I didn't think we were going to talk about it with that much richness, but it's great that we did, right?
No, I
And I got all emotional.
No, it's all
this shit
good.
makes me emotional. I really care about this subject matter. I mean,
Yeah.
we know each other.
No, and I think though that it's a good, but here the point that I would, that I would leave with people is that just having that discussion there allows for further discussion. So to bring this point up with anybody, you immediately open the door, to say, okay, where are we going? And then if you say something like hardware, software, then you can then you do the follow-up thing. We can't make the assumption that they automatically assume that with no hardware, that software is just kaput. That might not be the case, and so you open up and you say, okay, well, tell me more about your particular software. What are the inner workings of your mind? And then it opens up the dialogue for meditation.
Yeah. So like in Zen, you call this expedient means. You try to go and say, okay, where's this person at and what way is going to speak to them? Everyone knows this kind of hardware software thing some way or another.
Yeah.
So let's use that as the starting point of a conversation.
Yeah.
And let's give them a chance to think of what it really means to have software.
Yeah.
Maybe it means more than what they thought of before. That's your point, kind of, right?
That's it. And then thereby, the supreme source is the source code for it all.
The ultimate ones and zeros behind everything. All right, cool. So I guess next time we'll finish up on Kuche Gyalpo. Right? Yeah. You have to boogie, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So next time we'll figure this out. We'll finish up on this and we'll talk a little bit about the Dalai Lama.
The DL.
Yeah, the DL Lama. And we'll figure this all out by the end of all of this. But
yeah, no problem. We'll have it all wrapped up in a bow and ready to ship off, or whatever.
This is it. No one ever has to talk about this subject matter again. It's done. These 4 or 5 episodes nailed it. So perfect.
Literally.
Yep.
Diamond Sutra, contemporary Diamond Sutra.
Yeah, just done. The auditory Diamond Sutra that you can just plug into your ear pods forever.
Yeah, while you're washing the dishes.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm glad we talked about that part. I'm glad I brought it back around to this body thing, because that's an interesting conversation relative to this.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Sounds good. All right, brother. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Eric,
you,
as always. Audience, thank you for catching us on the video, on the audio. Whatever. We asked a couple questions today on what people think. I'd certainly love to hear from people. So hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. That's Gin with a G, Gin and Tantra, the words, all of them, at gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Instagram at Gin and Tantra. Or leave a comment in the YouTube. Definitely I make sure to check those, so you can let us know what you think enlightenment is, and when we do talk about the hardware and the software, what are your thoughts on this kind of philosophy for yourself, or have you never thought about it? I mean, all of it's interesting fodder, because I think it adds to the conversation between us and then between the people in their community. So definitely appreciative of Eric, your effort, of our continued work together, and of people tuning in, listening to us, and giving us feedback and all that kind of stuff. I definitely appreciate it. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.